Hey, friends. Welcome back to The Joy of Recording. I'm Dan Phelps. This is episode 8. In this episode, we're going to dig into mixing. When I mix a piece that I've recorded and engineered and played on, I like to try to treat it as though I'm receiving the tracks from whoever produced it and I'm approaching it with a fresh perspective, as though I'm a mixer who's just received these files and I get to have a new look at it. So the first thing I do is I go in and turn all the faders down to 0 and start over because I want to be able to build a mix from scratch. And I like to go ahead and prep a couple of buses. So for those of you who aren't familiar, you can send all of your instruments straight to the stereo bus. That's like the left and right that comes out of your computer. Or you can group certain instruments into buses and process and manipulate them collectively and then send those buses to the stereo bus. There's a lot of great information about this technique, and I'll put some links in the show notes below. But in general, I like to drop all the faders to 0 and go ahead and set up buses for drums and bass. Those will be treated together. Guitars all together. Keyboards and ambient type instruments. And then if there are vocals on a track, I'll have the vocals go to their own bus. So there's a couple of reasons for operating this way. One is that it helps me to move quickly. If I'm processing groups of instruments together, I'm kind of marrying those sounds and I'm able to apply compression, not just to control dynamics, but also to kind of create movement. If I'm processing the drums and bass together, I'm kind of marrying them together as a collection of sounds that I want to breathe and operate in a certain way. That's kind of the really crash course on how I set up the session to get started. Now, as far as approach to mixing, I'm probably not going to show you the entire process here because I could easily spend an hour or two tweaking this thing in, and we don't necessarily have that amount of time. But I would say that 70 to 80% of the mix gets done in the first 20 or 30 minutes. And my perspective on this is to start playing through the song and just pushing up faders until I find the couple of elements that kind of drive the song and move it forward. And it's not necessarily always the drums. At times it's the bass and some certain rhythm guitar tracks and a vocal, or it could be anything. I'm just looking for the spirit and the heart of the track in order to kind of establish that right away and then build around that. So without further ado, I'm just going to start diving into this. I've got my buses set up, the faders are at 0, and I'm just going to start mixing. So let's get into it. Okay, I've spent only about 5 or 6 minutes on this, just kind of pulled up the faders and got general levels, adjusted some of the drum compression on the drum bus, and it's pretty it's pretty complete. Part of that is that I was tweaking individual levels on the tracks and kind of shaping the sounds as I went. And the mark of a good arrangement is that you can push up the faders and it sounds, 70 to 80% there pretty quickly with just a static mix. When I say static mix, I mean before I'm going in and applying automation to various things. What I currently have going on in my A bus is all of the drums and loops and bass. And the reason that I process these things together is so that I can apply compression and shape the movement of all of these instruments collectively. It kind of creates a sensation of, if I set up the compressor right, it creates a sensation of the actual drums kind of punching through and pushing the other loop elements out of the way. It kind of creates a really dynamic rhythm section kind of feel. Here we are where the drums kick in. So what I'm going to do next is create a high bass track. Basically, I'm going to take the bass and roll off all of the low end with a high pass filter so that I can treat that separately and add in a little bit of definition to each note of the bass without affecting the control of the low end. Let me play the rhythm section stuff again, and you can hear how I'm dialing in just the top end of the bass so I can sneak that in and control it separately from the low end. That adds just a little bit of growl to the bass, which is gonna give the note more definition in the track, I think. Let's hear that all together. Okay, so now I'm going to go and break out a few of these instruments into separate pieces so that I can process them differently in different sections of this mix. Hang tight. So what I've done with my ambient guitar track is I've split it onto two separate tracks and processed it differently. On one track, I have kind of a tight doubling effect that I put on there to widen it and kind of create more interest in the sound. And on the other track, I've put a really long delay. And I'm muting certain sections of each track in order to create variations in the sound. You could think of it as one version sounds kind of close up and another one throws way to the back of the ambience of the mix. Here you can hear an example of how that works towards the beginning of the song. I'm leaning heavily on the delayed track and then fading in some of the direct track as the intro goes on. So you can hear how the two sounds play off of each other, and you get this sensation of throwing way to the back of the mix versus kind of pulling it in closer and being more defined. Now, something that I've been wanting to do for a while with the slide guitars is to process them collectively to kind of tame a little bit of the high end sound of them and create a bit more of a funky dobro-esque kind of tone. But I don't want to get away from that really beautiful sparkly picking stuff that's happening in the bridge. So I'm going to create a new set of slide guitars and process them separately so that I can create some of that kind of weird honky slide sound that I'm hearing in my head. So I'm going to dive into that for just a minute. Here's what that slide sound sounds like by itself. A little bit of distortion and compression, some darkening happening there, and a little bit of slap delay. Now I'm going to use that as a supplemental part of the actual acoustic slide sound. Here's what it all sounds like together. By using the two together, I keep some of that definition from the clean tracks, but I get more note and sustain from the distorted tracks. As you probably heard, there's a whole lot of room noise that's being made a lot louder now that I'm compressing those tracks heavily. So I have to go through and edit the sections where the slide isn't playing so that that's not just taking up a bunch of bandwidth in the mix. So I'm going to do that next. Okay, now that I've kind of gotten a little granular with the slide sound, I'm going to pull back and listen to this mix again from the beginning, which is something that's really a commendable practice. Because when you're mixing and you start focusing in on one element of the mix, your perspective and hearing can really go sideways. Our hearing isn't a flat scientific instrument because we are also applying attention to certain things, which makes certain things really stand out. We actually can change the mix by what we're focusing on. So I like to take breaks or listen to something else, go for a little walk, or just after I've dialed into one specific element, I'll listen again from the top and hear it with fresh ears. I'm feeling like this is 80% of the way there to 90% of the way there. And I'm not going to go into the tiny itty bitty minutia, but at this point, I feel as though a little bit of automation to make certain things stick out where I want them to, and it feels pretty complete. And I think I've spent maybe 40 minutes on it. So I'm just going to listen again and see where I'm at. I'm going to declare myself happy with that for now. I think it's pretty representative of the whole track. I've created a little more dynamic movement and gelled things together a little bit. And I could spend hours more diving into the minutia of it, but there's also a point in mixing where you get to diminishing returns, where as you begin to pick apart smaller and smaller elements in the mix, the gelling and sort of humanity of it can begin to disappear. So don't overcook your mixes. If you want to hear this whole track finished, I'll put a link to SoundCloud in the notes below where you can click on that and listen to it. I hope you've enjoyed watching this series as much as I've enjoyed making it, and that it's been really informational for you. Hopefully, it inspires you and gives you some ways that you could deal with getting stuck at any particular point in the process. I know that everybody has spots where they're creating a piece and they either run out of ideas or they're not sure where to go next, and I hope that this has given you some new things for your tool chest to get through this process. If you've enjoyed the series and you haven't subscribed yet, please click the link below and click the bell icon so that you get notified when I post something new. And the joy of recording is going to go on. I have more things planned for this series. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So stay tuned for that. Visit me at danphelps.com. And if you have any other things, any other topics you'd love for me to cover, just comment in the comments below and let's make some magic together. Talk to you soon.